thing might happen to the Romans, so that they would be forced to call him back again to Rome to save the city. And very soon something did happen, which compelled the Romans to ask for the help of Camillus. For a long time, a people called the Gauls had been doing a great deal of mischief in some parts of Italy. These people came from the country now known as France, which in ancient times was called Gaul. Thousands of them made their way across the high mountains called the Alps and settled on the plains of northern Italy. For many years they lived in this region. Then they heard that further south the country was very beautiful and was rich in corn and cattle, so they started out in great numbers to conquer it. They were restrained, savage people, very different from the Romans or the Etruscans. They were very tall and strong and had long, shaggy black hair and dark, fierce faces, so that they appeared very terrible to the Italians. In battle they showed all their savage nature. They rushed furiously at their enemies, yelling at the top of their voices, flourishing enormous swords and blowing trumpets. The chief or king of the Gauls at this time was called Brennus. He was a man of great strength and size. He wore a golden collar around his neck, and on his arms, which were bare, he sometimes wore bracelets.
That's cozy!
The Gauls found
That's cozy! No, babe, the chili! We gotta take care of the chili!
Attacked some of the Etruscan cities, and then...
Babe, remember, we gotta take care of the chili!
...marched for Rome. A great Roman army went out to fight
Hurry
them,
up, come on,
and
let's
some
go.
armies met on the banks of a river called the Allia. The Roman soldiers had never before seen the dreadful Gauls. They were, therefore, greatly terrified when the tall, fierce-looking savages came running over the plains in vast numbers, shouting furiously and blowing their trumpets. And though the Roman general, Marcus Manlius, tried to make his men go forward bravely to meet the Gauls, it was useless. They fought badly and were killed by thousands. At last, they ran from the field and fled toward Rome. 4. When the defeated soldiers reached Rome and told what had happened, there was great terror in the city. Most of the people bundled up their household goods and fled to hiding places in the mountains close by, where they thought they would be safe from the Gauls. But many of the senators and other brave men, both nobles and plebeians, instead of running away from the city, went up to the capital, fastened the gates, and made ready for a siege. The capital was the most sacred part of the city. It contained splendid statues of Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, and, as you know, the famous Sibylline books. Some old men who had been consuls resolved to remain in the city and wait for the Gauls to come.
I said the Sibylline books!
They would then be satisfied and would spare the city. So the patriotic old men dressed themselves in their finest robes and sat in chairs in the forum, each with an ivory staff in his right hand. When the Gauls reached the city, there was no one to oppose them. They marched on to the forum and found the old men, with long white beards, sitting in their chairs, so still that they looked like statues. A Gaul went up to one of them and pulled his beard to see if he were a living person. Instantly the old man raised his staff and struck the barbarian in the face. The Gauls then fell upon the patriots and killed them. Then they began to plunder. After destroying the greater part of the city, the Gauls turned their attention to the capital. The rock on which it was built was high and steep. Brennus led his soldiers up the hill, but the Romans in the capital rushed down the narrow road, and after a few minutes of brave fighting drove them back. The Gauls made another attempt, but it was no more successful than the first. Brennus saw that the Romans could not be driven from the capital. He therefore decided to starve them out. He put a strong guard at the entrance so that the Romans could not come out to get food. For weeks the capital was thus besieged, but its faithful defenders held out manfully. Meanwhile, the people who had fled from Rome took courage again. They gathered at the city of Veii and organized a strong army to fight the Gauls. But they wanted a commander, and they thought of Camillus. All agreed that he would be the right man to be their general, so they resolved to send for him.
These are cozy dogs. They're being so good.
Here was a difficulty.
Look how good they're being. You're being so good. You're being good. Yes, you're being so good.
Volunteered to carry a message to the capital. So on a very
they're being so good.
And swam down the
They're
Tiber
being so
until he reached
good.
the
They're
Capitoline
just being
Hill.
the best
Then he
dogs
went
in
on
all
shore
the
and climbed
land.
up the hill as far as the Great Rock. The Gauls
Okay,
had
so we'll
put
listen
no
to the
guard
book on
there,
tape?
so they thought
No. It's in the public domain.
By great efforts, Pontius managed to climb up. Several times he was near falling.
We're listening to LibriVox, because all LibriVox recordings are in the book.
Message retracted.
It'll say that sometimes.
His countrymen in the capital were delighted to see him. They were also very glad when they heard about the army at Veii, and the Senate at once approved of the proposal about Camillus. It was agreed not only